Some endings in life don't feel like endings at all. There is no final conversation, no clear explanation, no apology that makes sense of the silence. Only distance, only absence, only a story that feels like it stopped halfway through a sentence. And we are left holding the unfinished page. We replay the last message, the last glance, the final version of them that still felt familiar. We tell ourselves, if we just had one honest conversation, one moment of truth, maybe we could finally let go. Because we believe closure comes from words, from confessions, from accountability, from someone sitting across from us and saying, this is what really happened. But what happens when that moment never arrives? When they move on, when they act untouched, when they reshape the story in a way that quietly erases us. We feel suspended, not fully in the past, not fully free for the future. And slowly, we begin to believe that without closure, we are powerless. But what if closure was never meant to come from them? What if the silence, the unanswered questions, the way everything ended without a clean goodbye was not a loose thread at all? What if it was karma stepping in to finish the story in a way we could not yet see? Tonight we explore something uncomfortable, but deeply freeing. Maybe the absence of closure is the closure. Maybe when someone refuses to explain themselves, karma begins explaining through time. And maybe the story never ended unfinished. Maybe we just haven't reached the final chapter yet. Stay with me, because by the end of this, we may understand something powerful. When closure never comes, karma quietly completes what words never could. 1. Why we crave closure so deeply. There was a time when everything felt simple. We remember the beginning, don't we? The late-night conversations that stretched longer than we planned. The way their name lighting up our phone made us smile without thinking. The quiet promises we didn't even notice we were believing. We weren't just falling for a person. We were building a story. A story where weekends had plans. Where holidays carried two names. Where the future included us without needing to be spoken aloud. And when love begins that gently, we attach not only to the person, but to the narrative itself. Psychologically, our minds crave completion. We are wired for resolution. Our brains love beginnings, middles, and endings. So when something beautiful starts, we assume it will eventually end with clarity. Even if it hurts, we tell ourselves, at least we'll understand. Because understanding feels like safety. Closure feels like someone gently closing a book and saying, this is how the story ends. But when the story stops without warning, when calls grow distant, explanations grow vague, and goodbye feels more like disappearance, we are left holding an unfinished chapter. An unfinished chapter's echo. We don't just miss the person. We miss the version of ourselves who believed in the ending. That is why we crave closure so deeply. Not because we need their words to survive, but because we want the story to make sense. Because when love once felt like a fairy tale, we struggle to accept that it ended without a final page. And so we wait, hoping someone will come back and finish the sentence. 2. The illusion of closure. Why their explanation wouldn't heal us anyway. We tell ourselves that if they had just sat down with us, looked into our eyes, and told us the truth, we would finally feel peace. We imagine the scene clearly, a calm conversation, honesty without defensiveness, answers without avoidance. We picture ourselves walking away lighter, stronger, satisfied. But if we are honest with ourselves, would their explanation really have healed us? Sometimes what we call closure is simply our hope that they will say something that protects our pride. Something like, it wasn't you. You were enough. I was afraid. We want their confession to restore our dignity. But closure that depends on someone else's emotional maturity is fragile. If they had the depth to explain everything clearly, would they have left the way they did? If they had the courage to be fully honest, would we have been left confused in the first place? The difficult truth is this: explanations do not always bring peace. Sometimes they create new wounds. And sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. Silence tells us who avoided accountability, who lacked emotional courage, who chose distance instead of discomfort. Maybe the reason closure never came is because the lesson was never meant to be in their words. Maybe the lesson was always in their absence. And maybe that absence is saying something we have been afraid to hear. 3. When closure never comes, karma begins working quietly. There's a quiet kind of loneliness that lives inside unanswered questions. Not loud loneliness, not dramatic pain, just the soft ache of not knowing. We move through our days smiling, working, living. Yet somewhere inside, a small part of us is still waiting. Waiting for clarity, waiting for justice, waiting for something to balance the scale. And when nothing seems to happen, we assume nothing is happening. But karma does not move loudly. It moves in silence. While we grieve the words we never received, karma is rearranging the path ahead of us. At first we don't see it. We only feel emptiness. But slowly something shifts. We begin to see the relationship more clearly, not through longing, but through honesty. We remember the red flags we softened, the moments we ignored, the times we accepted less than we deserved. And without realizing it, our standards begin to rise. That is karma working within us. Not through revenge, not through punishment, through awakening. Because sometimes the greatest karmic shift is not what happens to them. It is what stops happening to us. We stop chasing. We stop over-explaining. We stop begging for clarity from people who never intended to give it. And one day, something quietly powerful happens. We realize we are no longer waiting. The story that once felt unfinished no longer controls our peace. That is when we understand. Closure didn't arrive through conversation. It arrived through growth, through dignity, through the quiet realization that we survived without the explanation we thought we needed. When closure never comes, karma finishes the story by changing us. 4. The final chapter, trusting the unfinished ending. There comes a day when we stop checking, stop rereading old messages, stop imagining accidental meetings, stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen, not because closure finally arrived, but because something inside us settled. It doesn't happen dramatically. No grand announcement. Just a quiet morning when we realize we feel lighter. The unfinished ending no longer feels like a wound. It feels like a closed door. Maybe this is the final chapter we were waiting for. Not their apology, not their return, not their regret, but our peace. Some stories were never meant to be resolved through dialogue. They were meant to be resolved through distance. Because if they had explained everything perfectly, we might have stayed attached to their words. If they had apologized beautifully, we might have softened again. If they had given closure the way we wanted, we might never have discovered the strength we now carry. The unfinished ending forced us inward, forced us to sit with discomfort, forced us to rebuild self-worth without external validation. And that rebuilding is the real conclusion. Karma didn't need drama. It simply removed what was unstable and gave us space to become stable within ourselves. Now when we think of them, the pain feels softer, not because what happened was acceptable, but because we no longer need it to make sense. We trust that what left was not meant to stay, and we trust that what stays next will not leave unfinished sentences. When closure never comes, the final chapter is written in who we become. There is something no one taught us about closure. We were taught to seek answers, to demand explanations, to believe peace comes from resolution. But no one told us that sometimes the most powerful closure is the one we give ourselves. We think strength looks like confrontation, like final words, like saying everything we rehearsed alone. But sometimes strength looks like silence, like walking away without the final sentence, like resisting the urge to send one more message, like choosing dignity over temporary relief. And here's something we rarely hear. Being left without closure does not mean we were unworthy of honesty. It means they were incapable of giving it. There's a difference. We were not too much, not naive, not foolish for loving deeply. We were brave, brave enough to open our hearts, brave enough to believe in something beautiful, brave enough to survive when it disappeared. And maybe the ending felt unfinished because our story is not over. Maybe karma did not close the chapter loudly because it is preparing a love that will not need explaining, a love that will not leave confusion, a love that will not require us to decode silence. Until that chapter arrives, we are not incomplete. We are becoming. Before we leave, Let's do something quietly powerful. Instead of asking why didn't they give me closure, ask what has this experience made me stronger in? If this story felt familiar, pause, breathe, and finish this sentence for yourself. I'm no longer waiting for. Let that be your closure. And maybe that is how karma truly finishes the story.